Earlier this year, Coral Magazine interviewed 5 different filtration companies for an article that came out in this issue right here. This is the March-April edition of 2024, and I wanted to read to you the opener because it kind of sets the stage for what you're about to watch. With just a few weeks from inception to a print deadline, Coral editors Marc Levenson and Matt Pedersen set out on an audacious project. Interview 5 marine aquarium industry veterans with diverse insights into saltwater aquarium filtration. What follows is the result of over 10 hours of raw footage, nearly 109,000 spoken words, perhaps a few all-nighters, well over a century, maybe 2, of collective experience, and unprecedented candor from the leaders behind the iconic brands Life Reef, Bash Sea, MRC America, Reef Aquaria Design / ChemiPure, and RK2 Systems. We have a special guest today. It is Chris Krechter of RK2 Systems. He is a filtration company owner, and we wanted to have some words with you and find out what your stance is on things. But I really want to know, how did you even get started? Did you have a reef tank and you didn't like what existed? What got you into all this?
Well, our house was an aquarium house. My older brother Robert, who was the original founder, he's 10 years older than I am, but he had aquariums galore when I was a kid. I grew up, he had our basement full of aquariums raising discus. I was 6 years old, I was helping him make aquariums. But the truth is I had freshwater aquariums, and then teenage years, I lost the aquariums. My brother, he continued onward, and when we started RK2, I did not have an aquarium. I hadn't in a long time. I had a really nice screensaver that I called my wish tank. But when we started the company is when I said I better put an aquarium back together, and I built a 90-gallon reef. It was a corner tank. The rock that's in the aquarium behind me is the original rock I got from Walt Smith at LAX airport in the late 90s. And it's been in one tank or another for the last 30 years through 2 states, 3 houses, and 2 offices. And so I didn't have a reef aquarium, but I got one as soon as I could. And the bug bit me, and I like I said, that aquariums moved with me around the states in different offices, and it's the best form of relaxation I can think of.
Well, that kind of answered my next question. Do you have a tank now? I can kind of see it hiding behind you there.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can switch this for 1 second. Maybe we can have a little bit of a view.
Let's see if I can do something. It's a 120.
Okay.
And I have a big angel in there that picks at all my corals.
Okay.
But a number of the corals I've had for 20 years or so. Like I said, you've talked about supporting local fish stores. It wasn't for local fish stores, I wouldn't have been able to move that. I would take it to a fish store and say, package this like you're going to ship it out of state, because we are. And I would do the same thing for the people who order online, get it all packaged up and have the store ship it to my house. And I'd have to get people on both ends, but I've done that numerous times using local fish stores to ship my animals.
Right.
So you mentioned before we started Gerber's Tropical Fish in Dayton, Ohio. Do you want to share that story?
Yeah, well, that was our very first customer. My brother, as I said, had an idea. He was the vice president of quality marine back in the 90s and 80s when it was owned by Phil Shane, for all the old timers out there. But he wanted to get into life support because, as we know, livestock's difficult. And so he had an idea. He wanted to build commercial protein skimmers. We had one size, which became our RK75. John Gerber was the guy that said, I'll take your idea, and gave us some money. And we had a small shop in Orange, California at the time. And that was our first customer. And from there, it was word of mouth, and it was one job led to another. And the public aquariums came, said, can you do that larger? And we'd go, sure. And then we'd run back to the shop, go, how do we do this? But Gerber was the first customer we had, and so thank you, John, and he's still going.
So you mentioned a couple times that you're primarily building for commercial applications. Is that really your sole customer base? Or are you dealing with entry level, mid level, high end professionals? What is your target, and who are you trying to reach?
The bread and butter is the commercial stuff. It's large public aquariums. Aquaculture industry is huge. We've been doing fish farming for over 20 years. I'm glad to see the ornamental industry is now picking up on that. More and more species are being captive bred. My clowns were raised in Colorado. They've never seen the ocean, and I think that's the way. But our target, kind of doing full circle. It's been commercial for the longest time, but the hobby is what I love. It's why I'm a part of this. What got me into it, other than it does pay the bills. But I'd like to get back towards the hobby industry, and especially the high end, what I call the extreme hobbyists, people that appreciate quality. They don't come to you and say, I love your skimmer, but see this one I got out of this magazine from China? Can you match the price? And it's like, no. We're materials twice as thick. Our labor's twice as much. We actually have insurance, So I like the high end market just because they appreciate good quality. It blows me away. I go meetings with our salespeople and I say, we can't sell it. It's too expensive. Like when DC pumps came and LED lights, they were so expensive. And they fly off the shelves. So it just goes to show that this industry appreciates quality.
So are you manufacturing everything? Are you manufacturing everything here in the United States?
Yes, yeah. All our stuff's manufactured in the U.S.
All right.
We've had a couple molds made out of the country, but they've been brought to the U.S. All our molded parts are done in the U.S. All our fabrication is here in San Diego. So a couple components, but that's about it.
Sure. This leads into another question that was on our list. And for people who aren't familiar with RK2, what do you consider your best product? What's the thing that makes you unique and puts everyone else to shame?
Well, our main product is protein fractionators, and I like to say it's our quality. We're different that we're a Venturi-driven protein skimmer, which was in vogue, out of vogue, and I feel it's coming back in vogue. All our stuff is ozone ready. You don't have to do anything special. You either hook up ozone or you don't. Again, that's something that most hobbyists don't really mess with. It's not necessary on a lot of home aquariums unless it's something really outrageous. That's more a commercial thing. But I think our quality is what makes us stand out. We do not cut corners. And the biggest complaint I get is you're too expensive. Well, sorry, I'm not going to build a Yugo. It's just how we run, and so the protein skimmers are bread and butter. 7 years ago, we started building UVs, and those have really been taking off, especially the commercial line. We're revamping our single cell or our single lamp unit that is good for a home aquarium. But we haven't pushed it much because it's not where we want it to be, but it's getting close. But so I think the UV and the protein fractionator hand in hand is our bread and butter. That's what makes us unique.
Well, and I believe I saw sumps and other lines of equipment on your site. Can you talk a little more about those?
Yeah, we are just now starting to develop sumps. Again, it's something we haven't pushed because it's just kind of, and we do this, whereas the commercial stuff holds most of my attention and fills my days. But I really want to get back to that. That's part of reaching out to Coral because that's the customer base that we're looking for. Our new AC series protein skimmer, I think, in line with that customer base. And then the sumps are, like I said, they're new. We've only been doing them maybe a year, and it's kind of been word of mouth. I was hoping to have one here, but it hasn't arrived yet. That I wanted to show you guys. It's an integral part of the aquarium.
So, Mark, do you want to ask Chris a little bit more about sumps and just the general philosophy of of aquarium filtration. Although I think I just kind of asked the question.
No. I was looking off camera at your website because I wanted to see an example of your sumps, and I guess I get to ask my favorite question, and that is, what is your preferred material that you use for building the products you sell? Because it doesn't seem to be acrylic in this case.
No, it is acrylic.
Is it?
Yeah, that's an acrylic sump.
It looked like PVC with like acrylic windows. The white material. I'm looking on your website.
Oh, yeah, that model. Yeah, that's a PVC material with the clear windows. We have a couple different models. Like I said, it's somewhat new.
Yeah.
I'm not as versed with it as I am protein fractionators. That's my bread and butter, but it's something we are expanding into.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't have any great sump questions for you because, I build sumps myself. But, I could ask you this. How do I word it? One of the things that I can get concerned with sumps that are shown to me, because they're not the kind I would design myself. And the reason I design things to be simple and have space to work, and that you could change things later on. Where I feel like a sump that has a lot of little compartments, you're kind of locked into that exact design. You have to make it work. There's an adjustment of maybe water height, but you can't you can't stretch an area out. You can't put in a bigger skimmer now because there's a limitation. How do you feel? What is your, I'm stealing Matt's favorite word, philosophy when it comes to designing a sump that goes under an aquarium? Because, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but are you thinking ahead for them the long term? Is it more about, let me just get the sump sold and they can figure out what they want to do on their own? Where do you stand on all that?
No, it's something you have to think through. I agree with you in that you need space and you have to think ahead of time. Like, this may fail. How am I going to get it out? I want to clean it. Yeah. How am I going to get it out? I'm a big proponent in unions. I put unions all over the place because you want to break it down. Like I said, I've moved this aquarium so many times in the last 30 years. And you go back there and it's union, you pull it apart. So the sump needs to be thought out the same way. You need the room. Obviously, I think different chambers are important. It's hard to get everything you want. I've heard you say before, you have to think about it. Do I really need this? Is it gonna be in the way? Is it gonna be permanent? So the sump, I'm in agreement. Simple, spacious, and thought out, and with lots of unions. The sump we do, our skimmer goes in it and the lid goes on, and it's just there's a hole so the neck of our skimmer pops out. Yeah. So the way our skimmer cleans is you pull that whole head off, and you can put a cap on the actual discharge area so it doesn't spill. I just have a bucket that I always put it right into. But the whole idea is to be accessible. And underneath an aquarium is the most difficult area to deal with because usually you got about 30 inches high. You have a 24-inch skimmer, maybe taller. So I've had them where you have to take the lid off just to get the skimmer up and then out. And it needs to be thought out. I've seen public aquariums like this.
Yeah. I've encountered a couple of stories where people would take the protein skimmer and put it in the sump to slide it into the stand. And, of course, they're never going to get that skimmer out to clean it for the life of the tank because they have to empty the sump completely to pull the sump out to get the skimmer out. Terrible plan. And they were like, this was the worst decision I made. I was like, yeah, I cannot disagree with you more.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah. Yep. No, it has to be thought out. Like I said, I've seen some amazingly small filtration rooms for public aquariums. Mm-hmm. Our RK75, which is a 24-inch diameter, about 8 feet tall. Yeah. I was in an aquarium where they had 3 of them in a line, but no room around the walls to get to the farthest one in. I had to do some maintenance. I basically climbed the top of the skimmer, crawled across the top, dropped in on the other side, did maintenance on pump because you'd have to change the seal,
Yeah.
and then I had to climb up and out. And I was like, this is a public aquarium? Who thought this out? And the home's no different. I mean, you're in control. You should make it better. And so my philosophy is, like you said, keep it simple. I think we have lots of great equipment, but maybe too many bells and whistles at times, protein skimming, flow, lighting, and I'm not a big fan of filter socks or the new sheets is better, but the way I look at it, it's just a tea bag. You're going to trap bacteria in there, and then you're running all your system water, and it's going to leach right back to your aquarium. I'd rather have a little bit of cloudiness and try to polish it up a different way than a bag filter, because face it, no one changes them every 3 days.
What is the other way you would recommend then? Because you just said the other way. What's the other way? What's your way?
A big return area. So you have a settling, have your protein skimmer on one end of the sump and your return pump on the other. So, and then hopefully some baffles make the water go up and down. Yeah. So by the time it gets to the return area, it's settled. The flow is not, it's not high velocity flow. So particulate will drop to the bottom. Yeah. By trying to eliminate micro bubbles and any floaters, that'll pass through with a high velocity. If you slow the velocity down so you're settling in your sump, it'll clear up a bit.
Chris, do you remember back in the day, 20 years ago, when people didn't want any power heads in their tank, and they would get the biggest return pump to get their hands on? They would say, I got myself a 10,000 gallon an hour pool pump, and that water, it was flying through the sump. And like you said, the micro bubbles, nothing settled. It was just cavitation constantly. Do you remember those? Those people were crazy.
Absolutely. And it's been interesting to watch the hobby evolve, things like that. We were like, okay, there's better ways to do it. Like you said, just put a power head in there. I understand not wanting power heads because you don't want anything in there but rocks and fish and coral. Yeah. But it changed everything. You don't have to have it flying through, and then all that electricity that those giant swimming pool pumps generate.
Exactly. I remember the guy that had that tank. He was really proud of what he'd done, but he had the longest sump ever, and it must have had, I'm sure I'm exaggerating, but it must have had like 16 baffles, because he was trying to stop the bubbles with as many baffles. Like, why is your return pump so fast? I don't want any power heads. Yeah. So it'd go way too fast for the filtration to do its job, obviously.
Right. That's that's the other thing. There's different philosophies on filtration about how many times are you turning over the aquarium through the sump, and how many times an hour, or is it all the water going through the skimmer?
Does RK2 have a number? Do you guys have a recommendation?
Well, it's hard to do because it all depends on the loading of the aquarium. We've done quarantine tanks for public aquariums where it's 10,000 gallons and it's one shark. So its turnover rate isn't as high and their feed rate isn't as high. Whereas if you have a display aquarium, you may want to go 10 times an hour. Whereas you're going to maybe do 4 times an hour through something that's not so loaded. Okay. Most home aquariums are pretty loaded, we hope them to be. So, I like at least 4 times an hour on most home aquariums.
There you go. All right.
It's a lot of debate on that, but it's all about the loading and your feeding. It's what are you doing to your water?
So what does successful filtration look like to you? If I came to you and said, Chris, design me a filtration system for my 75 gallon aquarium, let's just say that. What would you tell me I needed? What I don't? What might I overlook if you're, if I'm just as a hobbyist not thinking about it?
Yeah. Obviously you're going to need a protein skimmer. It all depends on your animals again. Everything's always predicated by what you're going to keep in there. Is it going to be, just a bunch of mushrooms and a simple damsel with some zoas? You're going to just get away, maybe even with a wet dry filter, but it all is about the animals. But the basic things you need are the protein skimmer. You have to have heating and cooling. Not everyone does chillers. I understand it's a big electrical draw. It's a big upfront cost, but it's all about stability in my mind. That's what you need to think about, is not specifically what equipment, but how are you going to keep it stable? How are you going to keep your temperature within a degree or two? You know, what's your lighting like? Is it going to create a lot of heating? Or your pump's going to create heating? You know, the factors outside of your actual filtration are things that I think people need to think about. So.
So you mentioned the wet dry filter. So that leads in. We got a couple talks about that. First, do you manufacture any sort of nitrifying filtration?
No,
Any sort of bioreactor or wet dry?
We have a fluidized sand filter that we use
Okay.
for it's commercial size. We're looking at making a smaller unit to match up with our new AC series. But the only biological filtration we manufacture is a fluidized sand filter.
Well, you're the only person who's mentioned that you do that and that you use that. And I remember there were a couple hobbyist scale models that came out. I believe Lifeguard was doing them. I'm not sure if they're still doing them or not. But since you brought it up, can you talk about that fluidized sand bed filter? We did talk about it with other people, and one of the things that came up was if the power goes out, that filter's dead pretty quick. So I'm really curious for your thoughts on all of that.
That is true. That is a problem that every aquarium deals with, is power. Luckily in Southern California, my power is pretty constant, but when I lived in Colorado, I dealt with power outages, and I did have a time where I lost power for a few days, and I did lose some fish, and I didn't have a generator back then. I went out and got one. I've seen Mark's setup. He powers his whole house with his generator, and he's ultra prepared. That is the one downside of the fluidized sand filter. When you lose flow, you're going to lose all the bacteria that you colonized on your sand. Luckily, like I said, the one we do it's larger, and public aquariums always have backup systems, so they're not without power.
So we talked about the downside, but what are all the upsides? Why?
Tell us about what you got. Like, tell us what it is, what size it is, how much water or system would you recommend it goes with? How long can it be without power when it collapses? How long does it take to reseat it? I'm actually curious about this thing because I've only seen them, but I don't understand them.
Yeah, that is some great questions that I don't have all the answers.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I'll edit it all out.
I know it takes, depending on the system, without seeding, they take, 3-4 weeks to be properly seeded.
Okay.
We have 3 models. One's a 10-inch diameter, an 8-inch diameter, and a 6-inch diameter.
Okay.
And the flow rates that we put those through are 25 gallons a minute, 40 gallons a minute, 75 gallons a minute. Right. We built them to handle that flow rate because our design is that it goes through the biological filter, the fluidized sand filter first, where you're going to deplete the oxygen, remove the ammonia, and then it's going to go into the protein skimmer that will put oxygen back into the water, and also take the denitrification that's come out of that filter, and not denitrification is the word. Anyways, the pre-filtered water will go into the skimmer and then get skimmed out. We believe in putting the sand filter first, because then the protein skimmer will have the oxygen back in.
It's really,
it's a biological filtration. It helps clear up the ammonia. It helps keep the aquarium more stable. Gives that yellow tint, can be removed to a certain degree.
And it traps the particulates in the sand, right?
No, it doesn't do any sort of particulate at all. It's
Oh,
purely biological. It's
oh,
you know,
okay.
yeah.
Because I was thinking
So
at
it's
some point
just
you have to
change.
reverse it to get the particulates out, but no, that's not the case. The skimmer is removing the particulates.
Right. That's why it's a fluidized filter. The water, the sand is dancing in
You're
the
right.
in the water column, and the the biobacteria is growing on the sand. So
Okay.
it's basically to bring down your ammonia levels is the
Okay.
big advantage.
That
So
And
is
sounds
this
like a
different?
better version than a wet dry to me.
yeah.
So
Wet
then
dry is pretty old.
what are your thoughts on the wet dry? I've liked asking this question because I think all of us here are old enough. We've lived through the era where the wet dry was the thing. Um, do you think their reputation as a nitrate factory is deserved? What are your thoughts?
I don't know enough about them. They were going out, and my coming into this industry was the beginning of the protein skimmers, and it was all about protein skimmers, live rock, and flow. Um, I've I I've never studied them. I don't know much about them. I've always thought about them as a piece of filtration from a bygone era. You know,
Okay.
but
That's what I was
and
thinking.
I think they're pretty. They're still useful in a freshwater aquarium, but I haven't had a freshwater aquarium in like 40 years. So,
Okay.
uh,
So would you do anything differently if you were filtering all else being equal, a fish only or a fish only with live rock versus a reef aquarium? Would you handle the filtration differently?
mm, not a whole lot, I don't think. I mean, I've never had a refugium, and I know people that say those are a must for a reef tank, and I know you wouldn't want that on a fish only tank.
Hmm.
But I think the filtration is still pretty much the same. It's still about the water quality. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
maybe uh, I may be wrong because I've never had I rock live rock fish only tank. I have friends
Yeah.
that have, but I think they're more forgiving. I think corals are harder to keep. Especially if you get into stony corals, they can be really particular, and you have to really stay on top of your water. Where you can get away with being a little lazy on a fish only tank, but I'm sure I'll get some emails on that. But
Well, so okay, I wanted to circle back because we had an interesting discussion about this, and this topic has come up a few times when we've been talking to people. Um, you're really focused on protein skimmers. That is the RK2 bread and butter. That is your iconic flagship thing that you do. And you brought up specifically that you're using you're building Venturi style skimmers. And really, I think at this point we have the hobby going Venturi skimmer, maybe a Beckett skimmer, which is to me it's still kind of I don't know, or a needle wheel. Those seem to be the three basic concepts of no one's doing limewood airstones anymore unless
Yeah.
it's something really specific. And
Tiny.
so
right.
tell me more about all of this. Tell me all more about the Venturi skimmer, why it's your preferred technology, and just have a go at it. Explain.
Now, um, I think the needle wheel definitely delivers really fine bubbles. But you don't know how much air you're putting in because it doesn't have an air gauge on it. And unless you have a real high end pump, it's not going to be ozone ready.
Hmm.
So that's the advantage of a Venturi. The other thing is when you put a needle wheel pump in your sump, if you don't have level control, if you don't have automatic top off, as you have evaporation, the your the pressure within the system changes. So that's how you tend to have a skimmer that'll overflow. Whereas with a Venturi, you have the ball valve, and it's the same constant um, level within the skimmer,
Oh.
as long as the incoming water is
Yeah.
constant. You know, people sometimes I've seen it done where they run this is more on a commercial application. The water through a pressurized sand filter, which is different than the fluidized sand filter. That's the one that removes particulate, and you have to
Oh, okay,
backwash.
okay.
But that, like any sort of cartridge filter, as it begins to clog up, your flow rate slows down. As your
Sure.
flow rate slows down, you're feeding the skimmer slower, so it changes the dynamics within that. So the advantage to a protein skimmer is, like I said, usually your incoming water, if you don't go through a sand filter, is constant, and you can control the height better. And also, most come with an air gauge, so you always know how much air you're putting in. You should be putting in 50 SCFH. Well, if you have something clogged in your pump, one of the vanes in the impeller has something, you'll notice it drop down from 50 to 40.
Mm-hmm.
Or if the orifice on the protein on the venturi is getting salt creep on it, you'll notice a drop in your air intake. So
Interesting.
if you have a gauge, you can monitor that. You always know how much air you're getting in. Whereas because a needle wheel works on, it's not on pressure, it's on a vacuum, but it's a very low vacuum. It's hard to put a gauge on, because that'll usually suffocate, the needle wheel. But there's definitely a place for both. Protein skimmer with a venturi, I think, is just a little bit more stable and constant. But there's no doubt that a needle wheel produces some really fine bubbles. And it's like everything. There's some models out there that are better than others. And,
do you prefer the fine bubbles, or do you, preference? I mean, do you prefer that the skimmer have different size bubbles? I heard that in a previous conversation, that fine bubbles are good, but you actually need bigger ones to help carry the stuff out. Or is that true? Where do you stand on that?
That is true. We've been looking at some different nozzles, and some of them get so fine that they just suspend themselves. They hang in the water column. They're not rising.
Okay.
There is a point of too small. They're just like there's too big.
All right.
I think it's like 2 millimeters, something like that. We've done a lot of studies on bubble size and trying to, quantify that. And again, your water will control that. Your specific gravity,
Sure.
when it's higher, you're going to get the finer bubbles, whereas freshwater, you're going to get larger bubbles. So there's a number of things, but there's definitely a perfect bubble, and there's definitely a too small a bubble.
The perfect bubble.
So you mentioned ozone, and I know ozone is kind of it's another one of those things. It goes in and out of favor. It certainly has its place. What are your thoughts on ozone? And I had never really thought of ozone as being detrimental to a needle wheel until the moment you brought it up. But of course, that if those materials aren't compatible and would be oxidized, yeah, you can't run that ozone through it. So how do you go about using ozone with like an RK2 skimmer? When are you using them? Why are you using them? Do you guys produce an ozone generator, or do you recommend someone else's?
We did build them. They're a pain in the ass. They're a piece of equipment that I think is it's worth its weight in gold when it's working right.
Okay.
But they're very temperamental. They're high voltage electricity, and we put them in humid rooms. They're not meant for that. But the way we do it, because we go through a venturi, and the venturi has a high vacuum on it, you can pull right out of an ozone generator, and it goes through the venturi into the skimmer. Ozone has an active life of about 2 minutes, and that's what our contact time is based on. So you have ozone in the reaction chamber for 2 minutes. So when the discharge comes, it's mostly depleted. Public aquariums are required to do ozone destruct units. The small amount of ozone that we use on home aquariums, I don't think warrants that. Again, they're tricky. I had one, I misadjusted it, walked away, and didn't think about it. And the next day I opened up my bedroom door, and oh God, I smell ozone. And I ran down to my aquarium and found a couple dead fish. And, I turned the thing off and didn't turn it back on for quite a while. So ozone, it's a tricky piece of equipment, but it oxidizes particulate in the water. It takes tint out of water like nothing else. You had asked earlier, what do I do to get rid of microbubbles? Ozone's it doesn't help with microbubbles, but it helps with clarity. I can, I like to look through an aquarium the long end,
Yeah.
see how clear it is through the long end. And you can tell when a display, usually it's at a public aquarium, has ozone or not, because there is no yellow tint. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of good manufacturers. Like I said, we made one years ago, and it never really took off. So we hooked up with. We've gone through a number of different suppliers. Ozotech was one, Clearwater's one, a couple companies that went out of business. So right now, we mostly use Clearwater, but we're letting the consumer decide what they want on that. It's also a piece of equipment. You have to know what you're doing, or you're going to nuke your aquarium. And,
that was going to be my question.
A good controller is
right,
absolutely necessary.
So, as far as I know, because I've never run one, you can use the Neptune ORP probe to like see how the level is. And I remember one hobbyist in my club, his goal was to keep it no higher than 425 ORP. And I also feel like you had to put carbon on top of the reactor, or on top of the skimmer, because the ozone to like absorb what's coming out the top of the cup. Is that true? Is that still valid?
I mean, it can be. That's a lot of ozone if you're smelling it. That's what I mean for a home aquarium. I don't know how big that guy's house was.
Yeah.
But like I said, when I was running ozone, it was back in our Colorado house. If I could smell it, there was too much.
Yeah.
Is my rule of thumb. Carbon is one of the ways that you can scrub the air of ozone. But if you do it right, like I said, if it's in the water and the chamber gets a full 2 minutes before it leaves the reaction chamber, the ozone should be pretty depleted, and its lifespan should be just about finished. So, but again, it's not a plug and play. You can't just turn it on and walk away. You have to really pay attention, and the ORP monitor is crucial. And I like to do them two places: one coming out of the skimmer, and two in the aquarium itself.
All right.
Because they should be markedly different.
If you run it, do you run it 24 hours a day, or is it a night thing? Is it a day thing?
There's different philosophies. I've always run it 24/7.
Okay, that's what I was thinking.
So yeah, some people turn them on and off, just like they turn on and off the protein skimmer.
Okay.
It's interesting. I did and I still own a Reef Octopus ozone reactor, which is a slightly different way of doing ozone, where you're putting it into a pressurized system. And yeah, it's all about scrubbing that ozone when it's done and making sure it doesn't get back into the system. So if you're overdoing it, I don't know. It's something that I remember as early as the late 1990s. There were small units we could buy, and that was a much more common thing. And I feel like in more recent times, I just hopped over to the CoralView website and noticed that this reactor that I have is retired, and the generator is retired. I feel like the hobby has a very fickle relationship with ozone, and I'm sure part of that is for exactly, Chris, what you mentioned about if you get it wrong, the consequences can be pretty severe. So absent that, you were talking about the challenges of building or sourcing ozone. That leads into a question we had on our list. What are the biggest challenges that you're facing as a manufacturer of aquarium equipment?
Pricing. The last few years, plastic fittings. As we went through COVID and everyone had supply chain issues, I was having a water heater installed in my house, and I asked the guy, "Hey, you having any problems getting parts?" He was like, "I can't find 2-inch elbows to save my life." And I was like, "Yeah, I get it." Different materials come and go. We were using a Schedule 40 gray pipe that the manufacturer just stopped manufacturing. I was using a clear PVC part that we use on our sand filter on around a check valve, so you can see if there's any debris in there and if it's working properly. They stopped making it. Just recently, it came back. It's the supply chain and the consolidation of all the vendors. That's been kind of a problem too, because a new owner will come in and they'll say, oh, well, they offered, 400 things in their catalog. We're going to cut it in half. And then all of a sudden I'm scrambling to find a part, so it's the supply chain is the biggest challenge. It's always evolving, and then pricing, we just got hit with a bunch of pricing. It's first of the year, and, it's
didn't they do that last year? Come on.
Yeah, exactly. And we're like in November and October asking all our vendors, hey, what do you have planned for next year? We're trying to put our catalog together. We want to get our pricing. We're trying to talk to our distributors.
Yeah.
Well, you're good. And then January comes, 10%.
Oh, wow.
So price fluctuations. Again, the biggest complaint I always hear is we're too expensive. So I'm constantly fighting pricing, from my suppliers. That's, one of my whack-a-mole jobs.
We've hit every main question on the list. This is like record time.
Yeah, I know. How do we do that?
Early in the morning versus late at night, maybe? I don't know.
Do you? Hey, let me ask you this, because it never came up, and I'm curious. Did you guys used to be called something else before RK2? Like, were you RK1 and then became RK2? What does RK stand for? I think Krechter is the K, right? What's the R?
No,
what's the 2?
It is. That's funny. You were gone talking with your barking dog. I was telling Matt, RK2 stands for Robert Krechter Jr. He's my older brother.
Okay.
He's the founder. He made the very first protein skimmer and paintbrush in his bedroom, and he was like, look at this, I want to build this. And I'm like, okay. But that's where it started. But so RK2 is Robert Krechter Jr. He used to joke, Robert Krechter and my brother too, but that isn't the truth. The truth is
there wasn't room in the logo for "and my brother."
No, it's all about Robert, and he was the mad scientist. I like to say I was the labor.
Right.
He would build it all up, and he'd hand me a piece of paper and go build this. I'm more a plastics fabricator guy. I love being in the shop, cutting and gluing. The hobby's just it's a wonderful thing to support, with what I do. I'm not good at animals. I'm horrible with scientific names. I know what I like. I know what I can keep and what I can't, but I'm not a biologist by any stretch of the imagination. I'm more of a low-grade engineer.
Got it.
But
so you mentioned earlier while we were chatting before this interview, we were talking about the local fish store, and you alluded to it a little bit, the value of the local fish store. I'd like you to maybe circle back and say a little more about that, and just share your thoughts on that thing that we're kind of losing.
It's a tragedy that we're losing it because, there's numerous fish stores in the San Diego area that help me that are no longer around. Encinitas Tropical, Tri-City Tropicals, they've all dropped off, and you go into Petco and they're just, there's one that I will actually buy a fish from and quarantine it, but most I wouldn't touch. They are the source of our knowledge. My local fish store guy, like I said, I go in there and he gets me fired up when I was facing burnout. Whenever you have an issue, the expertise that comes out of our local fish store can't be replaced. And the part-time employees that work at the big emporiums they're not hobbyists. They'll talk to you about fish, they'll talk to you about dogs, but they don't have any expertise. You can't say, hey, I have a cyanobacteria problem. What should I do? If you've never done that before, they're going to go, here, buy this off the shelf, local fish stores are they're really important. And I know I have connections within the industry, and I can get my stuff at wholesale. But I like to I gulp and I buy fish at full retail price from
Yeah.
different places just because you gotta support them. Because if you lose them, they're gone.
Yeah.
And um, I my local fish store here in San Marcos, Aquatica, the guy supports the Reef Club at the local high school. I tried to donate him a bunch of stuff when I
Mhm.
found out about it, and they were like, "We only have a small space, but we could use one pump," you know.
Mhm.
And
Nice.
but the local fish store is promoting the Reef Club within the high school, and that's the main kid who runs it wants to be a marine biologist.
Oh.
And it's all because of aquariums. And I wish that schools would tie into aquariums more, especially when they're teaching chemistry, and
Hmm.
it's so much more interesting. If you have an aquarium, kids will gravitate towards it. But I think to go back to your question, it starts with local fish stores. We need that source of excitement. I used to go in even before I had an aquarium. When I was telling you my screensaver was my wish tank,
Yeah.
I'd go into stores and just walk around and stare at them
Uh-huh.
because that's what we love. They're beautiful and they're relaxing, but we need to support the local fish stores. And I don't know how to save them, but I wish we could link arms and promote them more.
Well, I think one way of saving them is, like you said, go in there and spend money. It's so
Yeah,
easy to Amazon it, or I'm going to buy it from, an online. I mean, I'm an online business, so I kind of need it. But at the same time, I go to the fish store and I buy fish food and test kits and things right off out of the store every month. And because my
yeah,
little bit helps, when the store owner tells me we only made this many hundreds today, I'm like, oof, because the rent, the utilities, all that stuff is crazy expensive, and they need to be bringing in a specific amount every day throughout the month to pay the bills and pay the employees.
Yeah.
yep, that's
I'm
right.
going to change gears here because I noticed that you have water pumps and you brought them up on your site, and you're the only filtration manufacturer we've talked to that apparently offers water pumps. So I want to get, I mean, all our systems require them. I want you to tell me more about what you do with water pumps.
Um, well, we offer a centrifugal force pump that is low energy consumption to high flow. Um, We do titanium seals. We offer a 5-year warranty. Again, we offer water pumps because a lot of our customers are commercial, and the pumps that we use are a lot larger than you would put in a home aquarium. Like Mark was saying, back in the day, people put fish in swimming pool pumps and have way too much flow
Yeah.
and too much energy draw. But yeah, water flow is one of the big components to what we do, and we also specifically trim the impellers to match our venturis.
Oh,
We're
okay.
looking for a certain flow rate and pressure to drive
Yeah.
our venturi. That's another part of the venturi. You can't just
Oh.
put any pump on it, but we're also very conscious of electrical draw as well.
Yeah.
Um, it's we talk about whack-a-mole. You need heat, you need light, you need pumps,
Yeah.
but they all create heat and use electricity. So it's a fine dance to get it right. The DC pumps, which are more popular than ever, are great that they don't generate so much heat, and
Hmm.
that you can control them with a controller. Have a variable speed on them. Uh, so those are exciting. But yeah.
So
Are there?
what's you
Go ahead.
so I wanted to ask: is there something really unique or different about what you do when you're servicing and primarily building for these much larger scale systems than the average home hobbyist is ever going to have?
Oh, we we don't do anything a whole lot different. That's why a lot of hobbyists end up in the industry. Uh, we're to be honest, what we do is dictated by the engineers. Sometimes I don't always agree with the designs, but it comes in and they spec in your equipment, you sell it. But they have more protocols. Sometimes they have to do all, their piping all has to be certain colors. Extreme hobbyists will do that. You look, some of them, all the incoming water is blue and all the outgoing water is green pipe. And, that's why it's a hobby, you can go as crazy with it as you want. Yeah. But to be honest, the parameters and the design are basically the same. It's just a larger scale. And the other thing is you can get away with more on a larger aquarium. As we know, changes happen a lot slower on a 500-gallon aquarium than a 75-gallon aquarium. Yeah. A heater goes out, it's going to take a while for that to drop down. So the commercial systems are actually easier because they're more forgiving because of that respect. Yeah. But the design parameters are all the same.
All right, let me ask you this. Do you have any chemical filtration situations that your commercial clients need you to address? Like, do you have to build something for a specific chemical filter?
No. It's interesting you bring up, I'm not a life support operator or an aquarist at a thing, but I'm curious how they do their dosing and stuff. Mm-hmm. The only mechanical chemical pump, is I would think of would be dosing, and we're not involved with that at all. But, yeah.
So you're not making reactors to remove nitrate, like filling up with sulfur. You're not, I don't know, making reactors that hold Purigen or so. That's not part of your inventory?
Not at this point. Okay. Yeah, that is the next big hurdle. When that happens, we really cut back on the ability, if we can cut back on the ability to do water changes by nitrification removal, that'll be huge for the aquarium industry, and especially the large scale. I mean, we do 20% on 100 gallons, not that much, but you have, 1 million gallons like the Georgia Aquarium. Right. How do you do a water change on?
Since you are large scale focused, what is the smallest hobbyist grade or hobbyist targeted piece of like skimmer? That's your primary thing. I'm not asking this the way I want to ask it. At what point is a home hobbyist going to hit that scale where RK2 is going to be one of the possible solution providers?
Well, we have 2 home units, the X-Flow. The smaller one is, about 100 gallons, I would say is about, the threshold, smallest aquarium that we would address. And then we go up from there. But about 100 gallons is about the level you're going to need to where an RK2 skimmer would be suitable, not oversized.
Oh, well, that leads to, I was just going to ask, can you overfilter a system? Like if I wanted to use this like a 200-gallon protein skimmer, I know it's all very loose, but if I said I want to throw it on my 75-gallon tank, is that going to cause a problem?
It's not going to cause a problem, but it's not going to work very well. It's going to look like it doesn't work. You're not going to be pulling a ton of skimming. Whereas if you do the other way around, let's say you put a hobby size unit on a fully loaded display tank at your local public aquarium, that thing's never going to stop. It's going to have the blackest, gookiest stuff coming out of it 24/7, but because it's never going to catch up. Whereas when you oversize a skimmer, maybe an hour after you feed, when it starts to drop to the bottom and starts to break down, skimmer's going to, look like it's working, but then it's going to remove all that organic material out of the water, and then it's going to go back to not doing anything. And you're going to go, oh, the skimmer doesn't work. But in fact, it's removed everything it could possibly remove, and now it's just putting oxygen in the water or maybe taking out CO2. I don't know.
It's interesting. So having the right size equipment, kind of finding that sweet spot will give you not the best result, but someone else basically said the same thing that you said, where like it's going to look like it's not working because it's already finished its job.
Hmm.
So at that point, I just look. Maybe the answer that I'm hearing is there's no need. You're not going to get any extra benefit other than maybe some buffering capacity by having that larger thing, and it might reflect poorly on the filter or the device when it really shouldn't because it's done everything it can do.
Yeah. And it goes back to our conversation about sumps, about having room to maneuver. If you put in an oversized skimmer, it's just, A, it's going to cost you more money that you could put elsewhere. And B, it's just going to take up space where you're going to want to put your hands. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, oversized skimmers, it really is not going to do anything. It's just going to be there for when you get a larger aquarium.
Well, that's actually maybe a good reason to do it. Not by the piece of equipment twice. If you know you're getting bigger. I wanted to ask, since you are doing so much more what we would call commercial or public scale type devices, is that all custom built? Is it built to order, or do you maintain some basic inventory and do custom building? I'm just curious how that works.
We all our stuff is built to order pretty much. We don't keep a whole lot of inventory. It's hard to. And also, we have so many models. I build things up, and then everyone wants the size below it or above it, and it sits there. It's crazy how it works that way. But we only do custom stuff usually when it's height requirements. If they're too tall, we'll make them smaller. We have made them a little taller, but I have found that getting taller isn't always better either because as the bubbles rise, they entrain and then they become big bubbles. But we don't do a whole lot of custom stuff. We will. I mean, that's another thing that we're open to, and why the engineers like us. They say, hey, we have this room, but it only has a 6-foot ceiling. What can you do? We'll make a custom unit in that application. But for the most part, our models are pretty much dedicated to what they are. We move ports around sometimes. They want the inlet to be on the left side rather than the right side, or vice versa. Simple things like that. But it's hard to do custom stuff and stay in a production mode. But
well, based on what you said earlier, I'm starting to think you might need to start building ladders on the side so you can easily climb over them to get to the other side.
We actually have a company that we've worked with that makes scaffolding for the bigger units. So they have little steps that go up, and then you can get up to the top. Yeah. And that's, an OSHA requirement that you're going to get from a public aquarium.
Oh, yeah.
Rather than a ladder.
Yeah. Do you make the ones that have the self-cleaning cups and all that, all the fancy
that we do
accessories?
We do. And see, and that's another thing that's different for the home aquarius. The new AC series has our complete washdown, which is both the internal of the riser and the external. But you have to have that hooked up to you need two things. One, you have to have a sewer that it can drain to, and you have to have a supply of water, a freshwater line that comes in that has, some amount of pressure on it so it can actually wash down. And, that's not available in most,
homes,
hobby setups. The ones I call the extreme hobbyists will do that, and we've all seen it. There are some amazing aquariums that people put incredible amounts of energy and money into that have, like I said, every bell and whistle, and they have it hooked up to the sewer, and they have public fresh water coming in. And but speaking of washdowns, and I had touched on the Venturi and how occasionally it will over time salt creep will start to build up around the orifice where the vacuum goes in. And simple thing for us has always been, well, while it's running, you just pour some fresh water in it and it washes it away. We are working on a new timer unit that be in conjunction with the washing down of the cone and the collection cup that'll also put water once a day into the Venturi.
Neat.
And that's
really
on
smart.
A solenoid valve, and it's on a touch screen controller. Our older controller was an irrigation controller. Wasn't, like many of the things in our hobby, it wasn't intended to be used on an aquarium, but we found a way to make it work for an aquarium. And except this is one we designed ourselves. It's touchscreen. It says, internal, external venturi, and you can push it in and go duration 5 minutes. How often? Once a day,
Yeah.
every 2 hours, whatever you want.
I
So
mean,
that's
that's pretty
it's what we're
ingenious.
working on. But what I was going to say is the one hurdle is having incoming water. It's not a problem most commercial sites, but for the home aquarium, we're trying to figure out a way. Can we power that with just a pump, and a bucket of water?
Right.
Okay.
The top off.
Well, that's what I was just gonna
Yeah.
say. Like, we'll just end the interview here for a second off the record. I'm sitting here going, Chris, you need to patent that. That's a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
Because all of my skimmers, whatever type of style they are, invariably at some point you're in there removing the hose, and I'm going with like a bent-in paper clip to chisel away the salt that's built up, and flushing it with fresh water every day. I mean, I instantly think of anyone could do this if they just put a T on their air intake and hook up a dosing pump or an auto top off to your top off reservoir and just run that fresh water through.
1 minute.
Doesn't do any. I mean, you could just run your auto top off straight through your protein skimmer. The only thing is it would shut the skimmer down, or at least hamper it while it's running. But I mean, that's you're not going to get any foam production if you're sucking water.
Yeah.
But that would keep that. That's brilliant, Chris. So hats off to you for that. But maybe go patent that.
Actually, when he's describing it, my brain was thinking about how a few years ago I'm at like Lowe's or Home Depot, and they had the Samsung fridge with a iPad built into the door. And I was like, who's going to watch a movie on their, refrigerator door? But now we're going to have protein skimmers with an iPad built in the side where you can like touch all your...
It's interesting because I had a conversation recently with a sensor guy, and our equipment, like I said, we put them in some pretty nasty environments. So you put electronics in most filter rooms, the humidity in the air is going to wipe them out.
Yeah. But
I so much stuff that we buy these days has controllers that, we control with our phone or sensors. The Apex was a great leap forward in that. What I can do on my phone, when all of a sudden I get an alarm, I'm like, oh, my top off pump's not on. Boom, boom, I turn it on, or, it's great. But anyways, I've been looking at how we can utilize this technology. The one thing I can think of is like the discharge. Rather than a manual valve, you could do it with a pressure sensor on the chamber itself. You would know your flow rate and the height of the water through a pressure sensor. It's a great advantage, but the other side of the coin is it's something else to go wrong.
Yep.
So I always try to weigh the different pluses and minuses when we move into the electronics and all the features that we can add. Will they work? Will they? As we said at the beginning of the conversation, one of the biggest things to aquariums is stability. So if you put a piece of equipment in there that's not going to be totally reliable, you're going to lose some stability. So I'm excited about what electronics and the computers, and you're saying an iPad built into your skimmer. I mean, the Apex is practically there on our phone, but it's like I said, it has pluses and minuses.
All right, I thought of another question, and these can be just yes, no, I hate it, I love it. Thoughts on fleece rollers, algae turf scrubbers? What else, Matt? What are other ones? Those are two on top of my mind. When you're building your sumps, do you try to incorporate an area for a fleece roller or an algae turf scrubber? Thoughts on that?
We haven't. We've just had a spot for filter bags, which is traditional. I like the fleece roller because, other than the fact it's kind of wasteful, you're tearing off a sheet, throwing it away. I like, that you reuse a filter bag. But again, filter bags end up just being a big tea bag in my thing. You trap all this detritus and bacteria, and then you sieve all your water through it. But you can't deny what they do. They polish the water. I like I like the fleece rollers. we haven't incorporated that into our sump, and I really don't know enough about turf scrubbers. I haven't used them at all.
Okay. All right.
So here's another one on your list, Mark. Thoughts on activated carbon? What do you think? Where does carbon fit into this for you?
I don't use it much. I don't use much of any, I do dosing, obviously, but I don't use activated carbon or any of the other things. I know I had a service guy that was really into it, and he'd have floated in the sump. It's another tool that we have that helps for clarifying the water.
Yeah.
I don't see a downside to it. It's just
But
it's maintenance that you have to stay.
It's not a priority for you. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Do you have thoughts about passive filtration versus active filtration? Because that's what I think about when it comes to carbon. If it's in a bag in the corner, it's passive. If it's in a reactor, water's flowing through it, it's active. Any opinions on that?
Yeah. No. It's like I said, I haven't used it much, and
fair enough.
Yeah.
I really think I'm talking to a man that deals with big $1 million or million gallon exhibits, and he's not used to us 100-gallon, 400-gallon aquarium peoples.
I miss it though. This is this is where the love is, with the small aquariums. It's hands-on. The big $1 million aquariums, like I said, they're all dictated by the engineers and the staff of the aquarium. We don't really get a lot of input.
Right.
We're told we need 3 of your 75s, or we need 2 of your 50s, and they got to be here on such and such a date. But the hobby is more fun because you're hands-on. And it's also the cutting edge. The stuff that we do in our homes is what ends up in the public aquarium. It just takes 10 years down the road. Aquarists, we'll put something in and give it a couple months and go, that was a waste of time, and rip it out and put something else in and go, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and you tell all your friends, and then eventually they make their way to public aquariums. I remember, when we first started, the original layout for a public aquarium was 50%. Well, it started off, they would only use pressurized sand filters, which are, big giant swimming pool filters, slowly push the water through. And I forget what design firm and which aquarium, my brother Robert would remember, the first aquarium that decided to use protein skimming, and they went 50-50. And that was a big turning point, and it was a risk on the engineers department, on their, choice to go that way. And it worked. And then now it's gotten to the point where they're barely even using pressurized sand filters, only on certain exhibits, because, one, they waste a ton of water when you have to backwash them. And one of the other things, like I said, it messes with your flow rates. And but it all began with the hobbyists. The hobbyists were the first to try a protein skimmer, even if it just was an air stone in a tube. And they went, hey, look at this bubbly stuff. It's pretty gross. I'm glad that's out of my aquarium. Yeah. And it ends up in a public aquarium. It just takes 10 years.
Okay, I have another question I want to ask you. It has nothing to do with the interview, Matt.
Okay,
but I was just curious because you talked about you make a sump, you made the skimmer, they go together, you made the lid to fit around the body of the skimmer, so it's like this perfect puzzle piece. What happens when the protein skimmer goes crazy and overflows and goes over the top and hits the lid? Does it just roll off the edge of the sump? Or have you come up with a solution to divert the water back into the sump?
There's one, it's not so tight around the neck of the skimmer that it'll drip back into the sump, and same with the edges. Okay. It's not a complete seal, so not,
All right. I'm always about logistics. I'm like, that lid thing looks neat, but I don't want to mop the floor. I want to avoid that at all costs,
Yeah.
All right.
I was pretty impressed with your aquarium that split, that it almost hit your drain.
Yeah, I know. That's pretty good aim.
You were very lucky.
Of all the seams, that's the one. It was right by the drain. That was so convenient.
And that you had that drain is great foresight.
Yeah, I'm really glad I put that in. I love that thing.
Yeah.
So Chris, where do you see RK2 going in the future? What is your company going to look like 10 years from now?
Well, 10 years from now, I think we're going to be, 10 years from now, I think we're going to be, 10 years from now, I think we're going to be, 10 years from now, I think we're going to be, 10 years from now, I think we're going to be, 10 years from now, I think we're going to be, 10 years from now, I think we're going to be, 10 years from now, I think we're going to be, 10 years from now, I think we're going to be, 10 years from now, I think we're going to be, 10 years from now, I think we're going to be, 10 years from now, I think we're going to be, 10 years from now, I think we're going to be, 10 years from now, I think we're going to be, 10 years from now, I think we're going to be, 10 years from now, I think we're going to be, 10 years from now, I think we're going to be, 10 years from now, I think we're going to be, 10 years from now, I think we're going to be, 10 years from now, I think we're going to be, 10 years from now, I think we're going to be, 10 years from now, I think we're going to be, 10 years from now Wow. We're actually trying to branch out into other industrial applications. For water filtration, municipal water, and also with groundwater, facilities. We're trying. I've been trying for 30 years to do something other than keeping fish alive. I love keeping fish alive, but there's a lot. Water is a big issue in the world right now, and so we're trying to figure out a way to use our processes on other forms of water, and you
Okay.
know, groundwater is one that we're looking into.
Are you seeing a lot more interest? You mentioned it kind of, I think, at the top of our conversation. Aquaculture. Are like I'm aware of people trying to start like shrimp farms in the middle of Iowa. Are you seeing interest in your aquarium technology from unexpected places?
When you say unexpected places like locales,
Well,
you
either
know,
locales or certain sectors that we might not think of.
um, well, the industrial stuff, like I worked with a fiberglass company that, they had to clean their water up before they could run it down the sewer because and they were running it through one of our protein skimmers and were able to clean up the water that
That's
way.
neat.
That was surprising. Blood water's another from slaughterhouses. I mean, it's just pure protein. Skimmers go bonkers
Huh.
doing that. That was an interesting application that came our
Wow.
way. Um, you talked about shrimp farms in Iowa. Arizona and Nevada are actually hotbeds for shrimp farms.
Hmm.
No pun intended. But yeah, it's the aquaculture industry itself has grown immensely. In the late 90s, we did our first aquaculture show. And back then, the industry was pretty mom and pop. And we had a full running system with our sand filter, sumps, and attached bins that you could put fish in. And people would come up and go, why do I need this? And we'd go, well, you'll have better water quality, so you'll have higher stocking densities, you'll have less die-off, so you should have more profit. And then they'd go, how much is it? And they'd go, ooh, and they'd walk away.
Mhm.
And my brothers, we were leaving, said to me, we should have been selling rubber boots because no one was interested in our equipment. And then you fast forward 20 years, and all the fish farms are pretty industrial, and the ones that are land-based all have protein skimmers and utilize everything that we've done in the hobby and in the public aquarium industry is being utilized there, and the aquaculture industry has really grown the last 20 years. And as I was mentioned at the top, I'm really glad to see the ornamental industry jump in there too to try to combat a lot of the negative press that collectors get. And most collectors, I feel, do it with responsible ways. It's always a few bad actors that gets the press, and then they ban collection in Hawaii, and a yellow tang becomes, instead of a $20 fish, a $200 fish,
Mhm.
and it's too bad that happens. But I'm glad to see aquaculture step in, and I'm hoping that it's going to get to the point where we can bring the cost of fish down. We're not going to have to fly them from Indonesia to LA to send to a retail store in Iowa somewhere.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll be raising them locally in Iowa. It's like I said, the clownfish that are in my tank, my son got from a kid he knew who bred them in his garage in Colorado. They'd never seen the ocean, and
Yeah.
the aquaculture fish, as you guys know, they're more friendly. They
Mhm.
see you, they're like, hey, food. They come out, whereas the wild caught fish usually hide for a while. So, yeah, aquaculture industry is really fascinating to me, and I'm glad to see the ornamental part of it jump in. One of your first issues was about the aquaculture industry and what's being done. And
Yeah, yeah. We just
that's
ran.
something else I want to take RK2 into is I've had ideas for troughs for doing, fragging
Mhm.
Oh.
that would hook up to one of our small units with a UV and a chiller on it. And,
So like a complete off the shelf frag farming system.
exactly.
Nice. Yeah, you were talking about the aquaculture issue.
Yeah.
This was the
Yeah,
recent one. Yeah,
Mhm.
this is a
right.
Modern Aquaculture 2, and we dovetailed it into from Modern Aquaculture 1, which we didn't. Yep, right there.
It's on the
Yeah,
front of
there
the
you
coffee mug because it's my first issue.
Yep, yep. I mean,
go.
yeah,
Very good.
Yeah.
yeah. And then I don't know if you even saw this yet in pincerfish, but we have where is it here? Right here. This is Dr. Courtney O's talking about basically spilling all the beans on breeding copper bands.
Mhm.
This is everything they know. This is like, and I remember when I
Nice.
interviewed Courtney for this, he was very confident that copper bands are commercially viable,
Mhm.
and I think we all know that a fish like that, if you get a captive bred eating, prepared foods from the get go versus what happens with a wild copper band, that's a
Yeah,
quantum leap forward. So,
absolutely.
yeah.
We were
I
talking
remember
about
when
aquacultured fish, and I was just thinking, hey, Matt, how come they don't make aquacultured clownfish that don't bite you?
If a clownfish biting you is the biggest problem you're facing, I'm okay. Let that clownfish
Actually,
bite
I
you.
haven't
yeah.
heard a lot, but there used to be all the time. I can't put my hand in my tank, my clownfish bites, and I was thinking, maybe that's the wild caught mean ones, but the nice
Well,
aquacultured ones don't. I don't know.
so
They
so
all
I'm gonna
bite. They all
I'll,
bite.
I'll give you a tangent. We'll go on a quick tangent. Back when Kevin Cohen was the director of Live Aquaria, and he was still in Rhinelander. It's only 3.5, 4 hour drive from here. I was over there, and he had some of the first McCullochie clowns, which if we don't keep breeding those, we will lose that species in the hobby. So please, if you want something different, go buy that species. But I remember they have a reputation for being incredibly mean.
Hmm.
And Kevin told me that the broodstock pair they had sitting in, I think it was in Steve's office, would draw blood.
Mhm.
And he basically were going, I'm like, you're making that up. And so I just walked out. I said, do you mind? And I just put my hand in there, moved it around, and those fish just kind of looked at me like, yeah, whatever. And I said, it's all about fear. You show the fear, it's over. Just
They
get in there
smell
and
your
just do it.
fear.
And he's sitting there like, I can't believe this. so just
funny.
got to
So
go
speaking
for it.
of
Show
Kevin
who's boss.
Cohn,
Yeah.
so you brought up Kevin.
Yeah.
So I told you Gerber Tropicals in like '95, I think, was our first customer. Maybe a little earlier than that. Kevin was he worked at Gerber Tropical. He
Oh,
was
that's
John's kid. He was in like high school when
Wow.
we did our first thing.
I-
Yeah, and when Kevin took over at Foster and Smith, that was a good thing for us because we had a really strong relationship.
Sure.
I didn't know he left. Where's he at now?
Quality Marine.
Mhm.
Oh.
With the change of ownerships a couple times now, with Live Aquaria first going to Petco and now another company, he's over at Quality Marine now,
Yeah.
which is a great fit for him.
Yeah, yeah. Have you ever been to Quality?
I have not.
I haven't
Okay,
either.
because it's on 104th Street in LA. It's right by the airport. I call it Wholesaler Row because there's like 5 different wholesalers on that street. And we built every one except for sea dwelling creatures who did their own stuff.
Okay.
But yeah, Underwater World, Tropical Marine, or Walt Smith's place was on there.
I went there.
Yeah, but that's a neat little area. I mean, it's like I said, it's Wholesaler Row. They're all right on that one street.
Yeah, I went to Sea Dwelling and I went to the Walt Smith International, but I didn't go into Quality Marine for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And I remember the skimmers were massive at Sea Dwelling. I know they're not yours, but they had these massive skimmers, and they had, like you said, scaffolding, so you could walk around the top part where the cup was, and the cup was monstrous. I mean, I don't know, it takes 2 people to take the cup off probably, and it was very different.
Or you just don't take the cup off.
Yeah. Maybe you just garden hose it. I don't know. I don't work there. What do I know?
Toilet bowl brush.
Yeah, a big one.
Yep.
Chris, where do people get RK2 products? Where do they find them?
Right now, we have a handful of distributors that are throughout the U.S. Aquatic Design Equipment in Florida is one of our main distributors.
Are there retail outlets where someone could go and kick the tires of an RK2 skimmer, or is it more?
There are a couple. retail facilities, Tim and Adrian would know because they handle all the sales. As I said, I'm constantly chasing the stuff here, pricing and vendors and back ordered. That's my job, is to get that valve or find another one, or and I let the sales guys do the sales. And
Thank you both for joining us today and making this conversation so fun and interesting. I really appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing how this comes out in the final article.
Thank you, Chris, and a pleasure to finally make your acquaintance too. I mean, I've probably bumped into you once or twice at a show, but
yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys at the next show. That's another thing it's good to have come back, or the shows. Like I said, I think Coral Magazine is the National Geographic for aquarists. I have a stack like this at my house, all these old issues. When I moved, I was like, I want to give these to a school. I want them to go to a library. I can't just throw them out. I mean, just for the photos, people who don't even know much about aquariums, they look through them and just go, my God, these are beautiful.